Morning.
Good morning.
I am delighted to be here for several reasons. Probably the first is that I almost was not. I have a new knee as of a few weeks ago. I had total knee replacement surgery. So until last week, it wasn't clear to me that I didn't tell Natalie. I kept it to myself. So I'm thrilled that I could make the trip. And I guess the other reason is that I have the chance to speak to thought leaders in education from across the world. I do a lot of talks in North America and Canada, sometimes Europe, but my friends from back home, I'm just so thrilled to be able to speak with you. And hopefully we can compare notes on some of the findings that I'll present to you to see how much these resonate with you from your home countries, and more importantly, implications for what we can do to help our kids thrive in truly important ways. So let me get started with where this work started. Originally in Connecticut. I moved from India to Connecticut to do my PhD in 1984. And by the 1990s, started this work with kids in high-achieving schools, first in New York and Connecticut, and then across the country. This is the important thing I would like to emphasize. All the stuff that I'm going to be talking to you about is based in scientific peer-reviewed research. So I am a researcher first, and I suppose a speaker second. But this is it. I'm a researcher first and a mom second, probably, or you can switch the two around. That is where I started my journey with my own kids, raising them as well in a community such as those I will be talking about, high aspirations, educational excellence, and so on. I think Nick was probably in the 3rd grade and Nina was starting kindergarten. It was a long journey for us and challenging. I'm sure many of you parents here, you've all experienced this. It's not an easy journey. It is challenging. I like to mention the fact that I'm a mom who has experienced this for many reasons, but perhaps the most important is because it is humbling. You agree? It is very humbling to be a parent, be a mom in the first place, and secondly, to try and negotiate it through this particular terrain is especially challenging for reasons I will talk about. High-achieving schools are those with high standardized test scores, rich extracurricular and academic offerings, and of course, graduates heading to selective colleges and universities. So here are the questions I'm going to address today. Number one, what's the evidence that our kids, and you'll hear me saying this all the time, our kids, not those kids or their kids, but it's our kids we're talking about here. Is that fair? Sometimes when I say kids in affluence and people look at me, were you talking about the millionaires' kids? I'm certainly not a millionaire, so no, I'm talking about our kids. Some millionaires may be thrown in there, but we're basically talking about upper middle class, white-collar, professional parents and their families. Fair? What is the evidence that our kids, high-achieving school kids, are troubled? Why? What are the major culture-specific risk and protective factors? What I mean by culture-specific is, perhaps I can give you an example thinking about poverty, inner-city poverty in the United States. Parents there have to be vigilant for their kids going out on the street at night where there could be violence in the streets and so on. You with me? That's a culture-specific thing, not something that many of us had the good fortune to be worried about. Well, guess what? In our subculture, we have our own culture-specific challenges, and I shall be talking to you about some of those that we need to be vigilant for as our kids are growing. How can we as parents, educators, and clinicians foster our own well-being and make sure that we're doing well? There are a few references. I don't know if you have access to the slides, but certainly on our website you can see get access to all of our published papers pretty much. Some of these are listed down here. What's the evidence that our kids are troubled? If you have any questions while I'm speaking, please do interrupt me if I'm not being clear. Or if you have a comment, by all means, just raise your hand. I'm happy to do that. Across multiple studies over the last 25 years or so, students have shown levels of distress higher than national norms. This would be in the United States. Statistically more likely than other American kids to show difficulties such as serious depression, anxiety, and abuse of drugs and alcohol. This is a report that was issued last year by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, a major policy organization in the US on adolescent wellness. So they talked about the top 4 environmental risks that compromise adolescent well-being. Number 1, no surprise, exposure to poverty. 2, exposure to trauma. 3, to discrimination. And 4, excessive pressures to achieve, usually seen in affluent communities. I'd like to just stop and just really take this in for a second. Our kids have made it to the top 4 at-risk circumstances that compromise well-being. And this is not conjecture, it's not clinicians' insights, this is based on hard data accumulating over the last 2.5 decades or so. Any questions at this point? You all with me? Okay. Please don't be depressed. I say that at this point because, see, when I go back to this Robert Wood Johnson Foundation report, I always say I'm very happy to see this. Why? Because now that it's recognized at a national policy level, it's pretty clear this is not the problem of an individual family or an individual school or an individual community. This truly is something that extends across these high-achieving schools and communities across the country. And I'd love to see what you all think as we go on across the world. So why is it important that Robert Wood Johnson said this? Because now we can get attention at the policy level. You with me? It's not just up to the families and the schools. There is real concern, be careful what you wish for, and once we're at that level, what do we need to pay attention to maximize the well-being of our kids? Right, let me explain this little table to you. On the first column there, you see acronyms for the school areas of the country in the US, Southwest, Midwest, Northeast going down, the second acronym is independent schools, public schools, boarding schools. Third is the year in which we assess, and this is just a short list of some of the schools we assessed in the last few years, 2015 to 2018. Second column is SAT scores. These are standardized test scores for admission, I'm sure all of you know, to colleges. Those are the actual scores for each of these schools, but look at the third set of columns, which is the percentile rank, for the mean percentile rank for these SAT scores, range from a low of 84th percentile to a high of 97th percentile. Just to give you a sense of what is the range of scores we're talking about. And some of our schools are in the 75th and so, but basically the top 25%, most in the top 20%. Now I'd like you to see the last 2 columns. These represent rates of, as the title says, serious symptoms relative to national norms. Now, we all get the blast sometimes. We're anxious, we're depressed, we're sad, and so on. We're talking about when our kids have levels of anxiety and depression that are clinically significant, that call for attention, perhaps medication. You with me? Now, the numbers you're seeing here are the rates of clinically significant anxiety and depression relative to national norms. This goes from a low of 5.3 among boys to a high of more than 10 times as many. So if you have 2% of boys in national norms are seriously anxious or depressed, you have 10 times as many among our boys, among our sons. Same you see among girls. We have, I guess, a low here of 4.4 to a high of 14. Now, the actual numbers here I wouldn't worry too much about, because the bottom line is we see this at every single school community we have been to. And that's why you see the thing on the left. Across different parts of the country, we have in cities, in suburbs, as you see, boarding schools, day schools, public schools, everywhere we have been to, every single high-achieving school.
Yes, just a clarifying question.
Yes.
When you're looking at, I'm assuming it's New England boarding 117, New England boarding 118?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It's actually Northeast.
Yeah, I know, but what is the difference, 17 and 18?
Yeah, so one is the first boarding school we did, and the second boarding school.
Oh, okay.
One is 2017, the second was 2018.
Right, because I'm looking at the boys' numbers, and there's such a big jump there.
You know, that's why I said don't worry too much about the exact numbers, because they vary from one year to the other. The take-home message from this slide...
The smallest is much higher than that.
Thank you. That is beautifully said. The very lowest number we have found in any of our schools is anywhere between 4 to 12 and 14 times as high as the average American kid. Make sense? Substance use. This is drugs and alcohol, including being drunk. So drinking, what you see here on the left has population. We have something like about 10,000 kids across different schools in that blue bar over there. And the orange is students nationally. There's a study called Monitoring the Future that's done in the US every couple of years. So we compare our rates to them as we assess our kids. As you see, being drunk is almost twice as high. Alcohol used, over twice as high. Marijuana. Vaping is actually becoming a bigger problem than is apparent on this slide. Becoming a very, very serious problem. Cigarettes going down. Either way, any way you slice this pie, in all high-achieving schools, substance use rates are generally higher than national norms. Now, I don't know how much this would generalize across the globe, but that's something certainly we can talk about when I'm done, unless anyone has anything to say at this point. Internalizing and externalizing symptoms. So internalizing symptoms are inner-directed, like anxiety and depression within. Externalizing is outward, like a rule-breaking, obstreperous, delinquent behaviors. Here you have data on 4 different schools, but let me draw your attention first to that yellowish line that goes all the way across. That is national norms. So on this particular measure that's called the Youth Self-Report, as it says on top, there are only 2% of kids who report much above average symptoms, clinically significant symptoms, in national norms. You with me? We're talking about serious stuff. We're not talking about just a little bit. So nationally, it's just 2% of kids who report this. And here you see the rates, and I've just shown you 4 schools over here: Northeast Public, Northeast Boarding, Midwest Independent, and Northeast Independent. Just to give you a sense of how you see this across different populations. Anxious, depressed goes from 2% to 20%, 10 times as high, 2% to about 7 times as high. This is probably, anxious, depressed is probably the biggest issue, the most common that we see. Does that resonate? It's mildly heartbreaking to me. With all the resources we have, all the love and caring we have, as parents, as educators, I'd venture to say we're all in this room because we care about kids. What's happening? You wonder about rule breaking. Now, these are random acts of delinquency, like defacing property, stealing from the library or from parents or from someone else. Suffice it to say, once again, not one school have we found even close to national norms. I would say our kids should be below. They have access to clinicians and resources, whatnot. No, not one school. Why? So let's start with substance use and start with the top right, easy access. Our kids tend to have money with which they can get fake IDs of the best quality with the holograms and whatnot. They have the cars in which they can transport their crates of vodka and beer and what have you. My parents are away for the weekend. My house, 6 o'clock, text message, and the whole crowd is there. Lack of consequences from parents, and I'll talk a little more about that. Peer norms. Now, in the US, it is rare to have parties or social gatherings where drugs and alcohol is not present in these high-achieving settings, right? So you sort of go with the expectation. Kids sort of go with the expectation. There's going to be booze, and do you know what beer pong is? I guess everybody knows. I didn't. Do you know? Well, okay, let me try another one. Do you know what pre-gaming is? See, this is a very, very savvy audience here. It's funny, when I talk to parents, and the last group of parents I was speaking to was in Connecticut, and I asked them, do you know what pre-gaming is? And I said maybe 2 parents of maybe 100 odd said yeah, and the rest looked a little puzzled. So it's interesting how our kids manage to keep it from us until we're, I guess, older. I think I learned about pre-gaming when my son was a senior in high school. Get some vodka, it's hidden under the sink in the bathroom. Have a swig or two so that by the time you get to the party, you're chill. You're not anxious, and then you can really enjoy yourself. Pre-gaming. Pressures to shine. That's the big one you see in red. Our kids say, we work hard and we play hard. People ask me, where do these pressures come from? And I say, my answer is, where do they not come from? Right? You see, from family, parents want their kids to have all the advantages they themselves had. Let me just pause a second here and say, we are not bad-mouthing parents at all in any way. It gets my gander. I get very cross when I hear people talking about helicoptering, and snow plowing is the new one. Have you heard about snow plowing? It really drives me bananas when I hear that. We love our kids. We want our kids to have the best possibilities, like all parents want them to. Sometimes we fall down, yeah, sure. We're human. We make mistakes. But let us not characterize a whole group of parents in one demographic as being either misguided, irresponsible, uncaring, neglectful, any of these nonsensical. Are you with me?
Yes.
Doesn't help anything to be name-calling. Can you tell I feel strongly about that? Peers, very high value placed on status and comparing themselves with each other. Just to think about it, we're in these schools where everybody's talented. How do you stand out among a group of standouts? How hard do you have to work to do that? And what you're looking over your shoulder, say, am I keeping my place in the front ranks, in the top ranks? Because it's only the top ranks that really make it. Schools, so it's not just family and peers, our schools, our teachers, administrators, they want our kids to be among the best, distinguish themselves. And then, of course, the American dream. More is better, more money is better. More money is the way to nirvana. And the way to get there is get to one of those selective colleges. It's a very simple message that is ubiquitous in American culture. And I dare say, through much of the rest of the world as well. My sisters raised her sons in Dubai. As I said, I'm from India, so I'm in touch with my friends back there, some of them. I hear similar stories where there is this vision of, if you get to Yale or Harvard or Stanford or one of these, then your life is made. Well, not clear. So anyway, this is the conglomeration, the confluence of factors that lead collectively to these pressures to shine, not just in academics and extracurriculars, but also socially. You have to be top dog, you have to be popular, you have to be, God, I'm so glad I'm not a kid anymore. Drive to distinguish themselves, I said, among other highly accomplished kids. Our children are looking to be as we are, as people in their communities are. Yes? The other part, sometimes people say, Professor Luthar, isn't this true of all kids? And I say, well, not really. Because for our kids, the goals are within reach. They're within reach. What do I mean by that? We are willing to spend on the coaching and the tutoring. Yes? No? I confess I did. I'm sure many of you will or did get that extra help where we can. This is how our kids live, by this motto, credo: I can, therefore I must. If it's within my reach, how can I not do it? It applies to them, it applies to us. If I can't get that help from my kid, how can I not do it? Yes? Any objections to any of what I've said so far? Common statements from our kids. You know, I found myself thinking, and I've said this in the last couple of presentations I've done, the vision that comes to my mind is kids in the pre-industrial era. Our kids work nonstop. They have no conception of what is downtime and playtime. Even playtime, when I was a kid, we used to play cricket in the cul-de-sac. And so, you're out, no I'm not, yes you are. And we'd all go home and we'd come back the next day and do the same thing over again. I don't know what it's like for your kids, but I tell you, in the US, they start playing competitive sports by second grade, by age 7 or 8. How ridiculous is that? There is a whole town that shows up to watch them say, oh my God, he had a bad game today, or she was really not on. Seriously? That's where they start. And from then on, there is really no time when they can just do what I imagine many of you did, certainly I did, is just wander around and play. Any objections? So how do we, given all this, how do we assess well-being of our children? I imagine these are things that are on your school's websites and that you tell your parents about. Certainly I looked at all these things when I was getting my kids into school. We must focus on those domains that we have not been focusing on so far and that clearly need attention based on the data, which is all of this. You saw the slides showing you the numbers. It is incontrovertible. There is no question in my mind that our kids are at elevated risk for all of these things that you see up here. And again, I'm happy to share with you the research papers, every one of them, if you'd like to see them. So given that, I told you in the beginning I would be talking about risk and protective factors. Once you demonstrate that a particular group is at risk for any kinds of problems, for me, the next job is to say, what can we do? Yes? That's what we're focused on. I study resilience. That's what my dissertation was on 700 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. But my commitment is saying, once we know for sure there's a problem here, let's set about systematically understanding what are the major predictors that we can change that are modifiable toward helping our kids, which encompass, most importantly, areas of relationships. Yes? Things that resilience rests fundamentally on relationships. That's a take-home message. Just take that from me. The most important thing is relationships, and within relationships, as you might imagine, the single most important is parent-child relationships. Again, research-based. So within parent-child relationships, as in all schools, we have found statistically strong effects for feelings of alienation from moms and dads, and we typically assess both moms and dads. And this is just an example of what we mean by alienation, is distance, feeling not connected to, talking over my problems with mom or dad makes me feel ashamed or foolish. Less so for feelings of trust or communication with moms and dads. Example, mom respects me, dad trusts my judgment. Here's a small statement. If you want a take-home message to go home with for your parents, bad is stronger than good. If I say kind, nice words to you, affirmative words to you, they help. But if I say ugly, mean, harsh words to you, the power of those can be 3 times as much as the power of those nice words. You with me? So one of the things that I like to tell parents, and say bad is stronger than good, but also say, I have been there, we've all been there. If anyone says as a parent, I have not done this, I'll say, well, not true. Just simply not true. I don't care how loving a parent you are, we all have our down days, we have our down weeks, we have our down months, and we fall down on the job, and that's okay. We get back and go on. The issue is really, we might have patches where we're not doing so well, where our kids do see us as being harsher than we might like to be saying, fine, let's go on and fix it. So this is a big message for parents, is watch out for your kids feeling a sense of alienation and harshness coming from you. And I guess no surprises here. Effects are stronger for moms and dads. Typically, moms are the primary caregivers. This is not mom bashing. This is actually giving credit to moms. We do a lot of very hard work, and it makes a difference what we do. And my job is now to support moms in doing this difficult work. Fair? No mom bashing at all. Culture-specific risk and protective factors. Anticipated repercussions. Parents differ in how seriously they react to different kind of rule-breaking behaviors. How serious would the consequences from your parents be if you did A, B, C, D? So we looked at 5 or 6 different kinds of rule-breaking behaviors: rudeness, bullying, delinquency, cheating, academic indolence, and drug and alcohol use. And these are sample items, so they're typically 4 or 5 within each of these areas. What we have seen in our samples, in all our high-achieving schools pretty much, is repercussions for drug use is by far the lowest as compared to repercussions for everything else. So our kids are telling us, in essence, mom and dad are not going to go completely nuts over this. They might be upset, but they're way more. My punishments, if you will, would be way more if they discovered delinquency or cheating, or even rudeness, than if they found out I was drunk or smoking weed. So our kids are telling us this. And of course, when our kids feel that repercussions are low, levels of drug and alcohol use tend to be higher. Peers. As in all schools, we have found statistically strong effects for feeling bullied, victimized, and sexual harassment, being called gay, faggot, so on, in the hallways, pictures being circulated, rumors being circulated. That's sexual harassment. Let me talk about culture-specific risk and protective factors briefly. Girls, there's a lot of envy. There's a lot of envy. We have found in comparing high-achieving kids to inner-city kids, levels of envy among our daughters are way higher than among inner-city girls, than among affluent boys, they're very high, and across areas. Looks, popularity, wealth, everywhere you go, the levels are higher for our daughters, envy of their peers. Just an enormous emphasis on looks. I just want to say one thing about envy, and then I'll go on. Adolescence is a time when we're supposed to be close to our friends, right? That's when we're supposed to move away from our parents and get close to friends. What do you do when you're in constant competition with your friends? These are the same people you're supposed to be bonding with. Now, how can I be best friends with Natalie if she and I are competing for that same grant? You with me? And that's our situation. The people with whom, the peers with whom they're supposed to be developing intimacy and closeness are the ones with whom they compete for that prize spot. Boys, we have found repeatedly links between high levels of substance use and popularity rated by their peers, not by them. Peers say, he's cool. He's the one who's doing a lot of drugs and alcohol. Both genders, very strong negative effects for comparisons with each other on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, you name it. The more they feel like other people's lives are better than mine, that's a very strong predictor of their levels, those anxious, depressed, rule-breaking, all of that. School climate. We, in our recent research, and you'll hear about the surveys that we use, we have focused now very intensively on school climate. Why? Because that's directly under your control, most directly under your control. You can do way more with aspects of school climate than you can with parent-child relationships or even peer relationships. So we've got a very, and you'll see the kinds of things we look at. Why is my slide not going forward? Bob, oh, here we go. Bullying, alienation from teachers like parents, having a caring adult at school. So we have the negatives, but also the positives. In our different school samples, we have found that as many as between 20 and 40% of kids say, there's not one adult in my school with whom I would feel comfortable talking to about a personal problem. Between 20 or 40%. I'd like to point out too, it's not just the kids are not comfortable, but oftentimes it's the parents. So our kids will tell us, our kids will tell us, mom and dad would not be happy if I talked about my brother's addiction or my parents' divorce. So this is not faulting us, the educators, but it is saying that there's too many kids for my taste, for our taste to say, saying that there's nobody at school. You with me? For me, it was my biology teacher in the 9th grade, Mrs. Wadhwa. I remember each time I see the slide, I think of caring adult at school. I was 15 years old in India, and that kind lady was for me. I should move on. She was there for me. God rest her soul. She's a wonderful woman. In high-achieving contexts, I'll talk more about these when I get to interventions. So what can we do? Let's get hopeful now. Parents, I said resilience rests fundamentally on relationships. This statement, I feel seen and loved for the person I am at my core. That's feeling unconditionally loved. As this is true for our kids, so it is true for us. Stop and think about it. I don't care how accomplished, famous, intelligent, suave, anything you are. We all need that. It's in research. There are papers on this too. I will share them. We must be loved. We must be tended and replenished ourselves. Think about it. We are first responders as parents to our kids' pain. They bring it home to us. There's enormous potential for us. I'm fond of saying a mom feels her kid's pain 10 times more intensively than the child, him or herself, feels. Yes? At least 5 times as much. We have to be replenished. Open communication starting early. But if you wait till middle school or high school, the horse is out of the barn. Vigilance for distress. They'll roll their eyes and say, Mom, get off my back. But if you sense there's a problem there, stick with it gently. If you can't get through, ask your spouse, an aunt, an uncle, a teacher. Seek professional help. These are all messages I give to parents. Please, consistency in limit setting, especially around in the US, substance use, and cheating sometimes. And be a good role model. Kids do what they see in us, not what we tell them to do. Yes? So if they watch you being a pig, sorry, that's not a nice word. If they're watching you be ill-mannered or rude or unkind, that's what they pick up more than say, oh, come on, be a decent chap or be a good girl. They watch what we do. Peers. Oh, this issue of social media. And I am now really talking to the kids and saying, how do we get past this? We have to be getting this message absorbed. What they see on Snapchat and Instagram is not the real story. And as I said, we're using kids themselves now with focus groups and so on to try and of course I'd welcome any thoughts you all might have to get through. Sexual harassment, again, using the kids. So what I do is I do an assessment at a school along with my team, and typically I'll go and then talk to the parents, I talk to the faculty, and oftentimes I talk to the students. So this is when the students start talking with me and saying, all right, here's some ideas of what we can do. I can talk with you afterwards about. Big thing is reducing stigma around reporting stuff on sexual harassment. So you don't feel like you're a snitch. Schools changing norms. It's not just okay, but it's important, it is decent, it is the kind of thing to do to go and speak up when someone is being bullied. That's not being a snitch. You're being a decent human being. Make sense? No?
Yes.
Thank you. School climate. Caring adult, reducing unkindness, not just from students to students, but adults to adults. And kids talk about this. You know, our teachers tell us to be nice to each other, but God, the parents tell us to be nice. Look at the parents and how they talk to each other. The kids tell us that. This is one of our recent findings. I mentioned how troubled I am by this. Feelings of not having a caring adult at school seems to peak at 8th grade, which is about age 14. Imagine being a 14, 15-year-old. This is the time when you probably really need someone. And that's the time when it seems to peak, when they feel the most, when kids most often feel that they don't have someone they can talk with. Right, so I told you I studied resilience. Where there are general risk and protective factors like bullying and victimization, every school has its unique character. You all think your schools have their own character, right? You have your own motto, the things you stand for, the school heads stand for, the administration, the teachers. In the same way, there are different challenges in each school, and our job is to go and measure systematically and say, here's what you're doing very well, and here are the areas in which maybe we need to do a little more work. Yes? Very, very scientific, data-based. As resilience researchers, we have been criticized sometimes for having laundry lists of protective factors and risk factors. So these are some of the things we assess with the aim of identifying the top 2 or 3 within each school. So you have, say, fairness, feeling like kids are treated fairly, caring adults. Parent and community involvement is basically the adults get along on both sides. Student voice, positive peers standing up for each other, lack of bullying, diversity, respect for diversity, support for academics, alienation, and overly high expectations, achievement expectations from teachers. So this is not all of them. We have at least 10 or 12 of these aspects of school climate that we measure. Then what we do is something called multiple regressions, which is basically we throw all of these in the computer for your school and say, okay, within this school, which are the top 2 or 3? You with me? It doesn't help you if I give you 10 things, does it? I need to come and tell you in your school, like in every family, like in each of our lives, what are the 3 most important things, and that's what our approach is. So we have just finished, or we're just doing this pilot study with the NAIS in the US with 8 schools. It is so cool, it is so wonderful. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. NAIS gave the schools half the funding to do this survey with our HAS survey with us. And big results are, across schools, the major predictors of symptoms were distinct. It's not like I can tell you every school had the same things. This is why we do research. So you had distinct, but typically, many of them were related to perceived unkindness. Once again, from parents, teachers, and peers. This was a general theme. And I'll show you some distinct themes as well. Oh, it's got stuck again. Bob? It's stuck. Here we go. So our hope is that in fact, we just did our CEO, Nina, who's here in the back, we just did our presentation to NAIS, and we were able to tell them, all right, in your 8 schools, here are the things that are distinct, and here's what we can tell each of the school heads with ideas of how to address them. Not just this is the problem, but here's what we can do to make things move forward. And also measure. So those same items you saw on the left-hand side, this is such a lovely, I think, visual showing you what I said. Here are the common themes, and here are the distinct ones. So the pale blue ones are found in just about 1 or 2 symptom areas. The darker the blue, the stronger the link. So when you see the really dark blue for teacher alienation, for example, that means it is very strongly linked to all the symptom areas: anxiety, depression, rule-breaking, substance use. In that school, NW, Independent 19. right? So the darker blues, it's pretty clear, teacher alienation is bad news. So now what does this mean? That doesn't mean that your school is filled with teachers who are unkind. It takes one. Think back to your own adolescence. It takes one or two teachers who humiliate you, who make you feel small and ridiculed. That takes one. So one of the things we're talking to schools, we say, yeah, we all have our lousy days when we sometimes can be a little critical. Let us use each other to try and pull back, because kids can be so sensitive at that age, as you can see with teacher alienation. And then there are some that vary. You see diversity in the one Northeast school, bullying in most of them, status expectations, particularly in this one Southeast independent school, was a big predictive factor. So you see how we're doing. We go back to each school based on our data and say, well, here are your top 3 in your school. This is our well-being index. And this is a little visual. I hope it'll work. Okay, just watch this. January 2019, 10% of kids with significant depression. March, that's January, February, March. You can break this down by, I want to see only among girls. Now I want to see only among 10th graders or 9th graders. Fine. You see how the lines are changing? Now I want to see among Asians. Apply. And there the lines are changing again. So this is what we give to the schools. This helps you see which is our most vulnerable segment of students, or which are. And you see, we show this for all those substance use indicators, for all the school climate indicators, and up on top are all the symptoms. So this is a 10-minute thing. This well-being index takes 10 minutes. And this is what we are now, thanks to these wonderfully talented young people. This is not something I would have ever been able to do, but they have the smarts, they have the savvy and the computer skills and whatnot to be able to produce this. So we can give this to schools now, and there you have it. You can look by any demographic you want over there and say, this is where our needs are. With me? Yes? What should not be emphasized in HAS context? This. Just do more. Grit? No. Anyone want to disagree with me? Please. You do?
Well, I just want to push back a little.
Please.
I think we talked yesterday about soft skills and softness.
Yeah.
And in a global context, where a child in Connecticut is going to compete with a child who's very hungry in Beijing and in Cape Town.
Yeah.
And we just need to make sure that, what obtained for us is not necessarily what is going to obtain for kids that we have nowadays. So, summarize. We're in a global context, in a global space, and perhaps we need to be a little bit more mindful about the fact that the competition for our kids is much stiffer than it was for all of us.
Absolutely.
And the competition for a job in Cape Town, there are probably going to be many more kids who are competing for that job today than there were before.
Absolutely.
And perhaps we may be a little too soft and too praisey when kids are spending a lot of time on computer gadgets. So
excellent point, and I could not agree with you more. We do need to encourage our kids. What I can tell you is, when we look at least in America, when you look at this whole swath of high-achieving schools, that is not the single most important message that we need to be giving to our kids, because they already work so hard. If you look at the population as a whole, and that may not, I have a student who's from South Korea. I myself grew up in India. Working hard was not, we all worked hard. That's just something you do. Now, and this is not about working hard, this is about just do more. This is about not knowing when it's time to stop. Of course we should all work hard. Imagine if I told you, just work a little harder, come on, you can do this. When you are at a point that you are reaching exhaustion and you're cutting yourself, and you come to school with a Poland Springs bottle with vodka in it, then it is time to pull back. When you have cluster suicides, as we did in Palo Alto a few years ago, then it's time to pull back. So there is a difference between saying, come on, believe in yourself, absolutely. But the problem is that too many of us as educators, as parents, are not quite as vigilant for, is this getting to be too much? That's all I'm saying. Is that fair? Yes, sir?
No, it's fair.
Thank you.
Point out.
I very much appreciate that. And there are obvious differences across the globe. My one generalization is, if your child wants to die, it's not okay. It's time to stop. That's my one generalization. So have I. There you go. I imagine there are many people in this room who have been there. And I am now 60 years old. That was 15 when I spoke about my teacher. Actually, it was 15 when I decided I was going to be a child psychologist in my grandmother's kitchen in New Delhi. I read a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. See? Another commonality. I finished reading, I said, I'm going to be a child psychologist. So my commitment to these kids, my career started for the first 10 years working with inner city kids in poverty and families in great poverty. In the last 10, 15, 20 years, I've moved to our kids because nobody gives a damn. Nobody wants to study them, our kids. Somebody asked me yesterday, well, where do you get the money from? Are there foundations? No. Well, ask the parents. They have the money. Well, the parents feel like we're paying so much to the schools. What else do you want from us? The fees are higher. They're stiff. Yeah? The schools feel like, wait, we have to build a new swimming pool or hire new counselors. You want us to go and pay for research now? There is no other research except for our team. Put that in our collective pipes and smoke it. Not good. So this is a paper we published in 2013, I believe. I can, therefore I must. It's about not being where you were, sir, and where I have been. Is we need to tackle that fragility before it gets to that point and be there for our children and for our parents and for each other. Oh goodness, this is such hard work. So research, I told you about the Wellbeing Index, single score, captures common areas, 10 minutes. From that, it's like taking a snapshot. From that, if there are problems, when there are problems, we do the high achieving school survey, which is about 45 minutes, done on computers. From there, we give you a customized report telling you, as I said, the top 2 or 3 things, feasible, collaborative. So a big part of what we do in our and I hope this is coming through to you, is not finger pointing, not saying, oh, the school should be doing well, parents should be doing well. It's saying we're in this together and we have to work together. The moment the kids feel like we're adversarial, it's like being in a divorcing household. It's not good for them. So let's come together, and schools, communities do. This is for you, the Wellbeing Index. I urge you, contact Nina, she's there, and I will point her at the end. We will do this for you for free. Ask me why, because I can. Simple as that. We need to know this, and the data you can keep. You don't have to share with anybody. But at least get a sense of how your kids are doing. Summary, take-home messages, promote honest and open communication. All of us remember, bad is stronger than good. Understand unique risk and protective factors. Again, let me give you another example. If you think of your own families growing up, or as they are now, we have our different strengths and weaknesses. So, for example, when I talk to my kids, when I was making up my survey, I still remember I asked my son, who's older, I need an example of parents being harsh and critical. Give me an example of when I was. He said, Mom, I can't think of any. Really? So, well, how about when I was maybe depressed? Yes, I can tell you. So each of us shows our weaknesses in different ways, as individuals, as families, right? Same thing happens in school communities. So that's why we take our data and come back to you and say, right, this is where we start. I'm not giving you 25, I'm giving you 3.
Excuse me, does your data focus only on upper school, or does it include middle school as well?
Middle school as well.
From what age, what grade?
6th typically, but we have now some schools that want us to start even younger. And they're talking about second graders with crippling anxiety. So we are working on modifying. We'll go where the data tell us to go. The question was, are we doing younger kids as well and not just upper school? Yes, sir.
Does your survey break down beyond gender and ethnic groups? In other words, do you distinguish for socioeconomic status?
Yes, we distinguish for, we have parents' education, we have are you on scholarship, are you an international student, we have lots of different demographics, but these are the big ones that usually schools want to know about. But we can break it down because it's also beautifully done on the computers. In the old days, we used to take hard copies to the schools and have kids mark off and scan them, which is way more, as you might imagine, labor intensive, but now we're able to, like this, break it down and give you or even gender now, non-binary kids, that's becoming very common in schools where they want assessments of them as well. So yes, the short answer is yes, we do have other ways of breaking down the data. Please let us be vigilant for this. I'm going back to that pre-industrial era where our kids just do not have time to be chill for a little while. Let us be nice to each other and let us work together. Sometimes when I talk to parents, I'll say, if the schools only give them less homework, I say, I'm talking to the faculty separately. Let's us talk as parents. Same thing with the talk to the faculty, say, the parents are so pushy. So yeah, I'm talking to the parents, let's just talk about it. All of us, let us try and take a step back, acknowledge we love our kids, this is why we're here. And yes, we make mistakes, and that's fine. Let us work together to be kind and forgiving to ourselves and to each other, to help these children truly thrive, and not just academically, and not just in terms of money. Yes? Authentic connections. Our little nonprofit is called Authentic Connections. Why? Because that's what resilience research says it's all about. We have to be connected in real ways. Natalie, Joan, Bolsa, thank you so much. There is my team of all the young ones, and there's the old fogey in the corner, bottom. I mean, I say the young ones, but Nina, who is our CEO, she's back there, Nina. Please get hold of her and do this. As I said, you can hang on to the data and not show it to anybody, but at least you will know what's happening. And we will know. Right now, as I said, we have 10,000 kids in the US from different parts of the country. Imagine if we do this all over the world and say, so what's going on? Imagine if we do that and we say, right, there's a good optimal level of grit. And there is a level where we need to be thinking, shall we not? Shall we take a step back here? This is getting to be too much. I invite you to collaborate with us. Let us do this together. I'm going back to my 15-year-old self 45 years ago saying, we can do this. We can do this if we're all committed together. And there's our website, Connecting Mothers. We have a support group for moms. That's a little television thing. That on the left-hand side is an NPR, National Public Radio thing, that's based on our research in Wilton, Connecticut, which is a very wealthy, those of you from the US know, community close to Manhattan and Wall Street. And there's another, David Feldman, who hates high achieving schools, very interesting interview. He started off by saying, oh, this is obnoxious. So I had to work around that a little bit. So. Usually it's an entertaining one. So please visit our website, talk to Nina, you know how to find all of us, and join us. Please let us do this together. The more data we have, the more we're going to make a difference. People, these are educated people. They're people who want, the parents I'm talking about, or the educators. Show me the data. I said, happily. How much more data can I show you? So please join us. Please join us. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Three minutes for any other questions or comments. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up on your point about not demonizing parents. And I think we're all acquainted with the terms helicopter and snowplow and most recently curling parents. But M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled, also wrote a book called The People of the Lie, in which he discussed human evil. And I think all of us are baffled with parents, say, confronted with a suicidal child who will not engage, who are malignant in their approach to parenting. So I fully accept not demonizing parents, but there are times, maybe out of the 100%, there's 1% or less.
I hear you.
How do we handle that?
May I respond to that, sir? It's a lovely question. And yes, you're right. There are questions who will just not, there are parents who will not see it. This happened to me very early in my research, when I used to find kids who checked off, I want to, sorry, I stammer on this. I have plans to kill myself, little sixth grader. I would go and talk to the parents, because that I knew those days it wasn't anonymous, it was identified as we had. And when I talked to the parents, they were like deer in headlights. It wasn't neglect, they were so terrified. I cannot imagine that my child would be feeling this way. So it took a little while, and they started off, the father started off saying, "I'm going to see your ass in court." His words. "How dare you speak like this about my son?" That's how it started. It took about 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. Then they had me come to lunch at their home. It took that much time. And you know what? I know this as a mom. God forbid that any of my children were, either of my kids were in that much pain. It takes strength to be able to even look at it. So I imagine there may be some, but I don't know that I've seen too many parents who say, she wants to kill herself. Couldn't be bothered. See, part of it is us being able to just take a step back and saying, all right, you know what, this happens, I'm with you. Let's do this together. Do you remember that song by Simon and Garfunkel, Richard Corey? Put a bullet through his head. Anyway, let's have a nice question. Yes, sir.
I have been reflecting on a statement that you made.
Yes, sir.
That this is concerning substance abuse, drinking, whatever, breaking of rules, that if the repercussions are going to be less,
Yes.
the indulgence or in that is going to be more.
Yes.
I'm not sure that I agree with that, because the kids have a spirit of adventure, a sense of adventure.
Yes.
And they want to go beyond what they know is your line.
Yes.
So it's not always like that. Sometimes
You are right. One of my doctoral students is running the data right now in 4 schools, and what we're finding is pretty much like a U-shaped curve. It plateaus after a point. So bottom line is, don't be too lax, but you can't be draconian either. And exactly as you said, wherever you set the line, your kids will go a few steps further. So make sure you know, and the way parents will ask me, so what do you say? I tell my kids, my darling, I love you and I want you to be safe. Please don't. And that's not saying, yeah, you can have a little Molly if you feel like, or go to a rave, or wherever you draw the line. But you're absolutely right. It's not a straight line this way. It's a little bit of a U. Yes, sir. Oh, ma'am. Yeah, ma'am. Yeah.
I just want to say I'm a great one for multiculturalism, and having been brought up across a whole load of societies, I've lived through it. And one of the things I tend to find is, when we talk about not demonizing parents, in schools such as ours, which are high achieving, which are basically a Western mold, a Western concept,
Yes.
it's guaranteed that you're going to alienate the child from the parent. And so immediately you're going to have that, the lack of understanding, unless the parents have got the same, what can I say, socialization, same exposure level as the child. Now, in cases like that, what do you suggest? I mean, I was lucky my parents stayed with my education, but nowadays parents are having to work harder to get the money to send them to schools such as ours.
Right.
So there's that gap, and it's growing.
It
so
is.
what would you do there? Because they are
Kindness,
almost negligent parents now.
kindness, I'm with you, we're in this together in a real, genuine, compassionate way. I get where you're at, I have been there. Come on, we can do this together. It happens, it works. It works. It's hard, there's no pill here. I wish I had one. Second to a pill, which is rubbish, is data, is genuine commitment, is us coming together and saying, yes, we can do this. And you're right, the fear, the instinctive response is fear. Look at the message you're giving them, saying, that which I have worked so hard for all my life, you're telling me that that's going to make my child suicidal? What kind of message is that to give? And the answer is, not that, but to excess. And let us be watchful for that. Not just in them, but in us. Well, we work too hard. Come with a bum knee. Natalie, I'm guilt tripping you. Where are you? I didn't mean that. Yes, sir.
You've asked us to put ourselves in the shoes of 15-year-olds.
Yes.
More empathetic, and obviously you spent a lot of your time doing that. What I'd like to do is take this from the other side and put myself in the shoes of a head of school.
Yes, sir.
And understanding these kinds of research. And I think what I would be very interested in is whether or not my environment is toxic or not. So I'd be looking for comparisons with other schools, and yet what you're doing with your survey primarily is you want to focus on a particular intra-school culture and analyze that. But as a head of school, I want to know, well, am I worse or better than the school down the street?
So that would be slide number 2, I believe it was, or 3. Remember when I showed you 4 schools with the line? On any indicator, you will see how you're
And so you
doing.
do show that to the heads of schools so that they can understand those differences.
These are your areas of
okay.
strength. So there are 2 ways we look at what's important. One is saying, where do you stand, where you're 10 times above, where the others are lower. That's one. And the other is what's related to depression, anxiety, and symptoms. So there are 2 ways in which we come back and tell you, either you're way off the charts on this one, and number 2, and these are aspects of school climate that are most strongly related to. So both questions we answer. But yeah, that we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't tell you how you're doing. And our baseline is all high-achieving schools. So it's not just, you want to be compared to others like you. And that's what we do.
Thank you.
0, it says. Shall I stop? Yeah. Thank you very much.